growing up in the 1950s wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Childhood was made of simple joys, small struggles, and memories that never faded. Kids today play Dreamlight Valley on a screen. But back then, kids saw Disneyland being built right before their eyes. No endless scrolling, no smartphones, just families gathered around black and white TVs, kids running through sprinklers, and neighborhoods that felt like home. Let's take a trip back to what it really felt like. Growing up in 1950s America. Screen doors slammed 100 times a day as kids ran in and out. Drove our mothers absolutely crazy. But to us, it was just the sound of freedom. Lawns were cut with heavy push mowers, the kind that left perfect stripes in the grass, if you were strong enough to push. And boy, your arms remembered it the next morning. Moms hung laundry on clotheslines, and kids ran between the sheets pretending they were tents or castles or secret hideouts. Milk came in glass bottles, left on your doorstep before you even woke up. And if you were quick, you'd peel off the little paper lid before anyone else got the chance. Most homes had just one bathroom, and siblings fought like gladiators for their turn. You learned patience. Or you learned to pound on the door. The kitchen always smelled like meatloaf, hot biscuits, or a Jell-O mold wobbling on the counter. Nobody liked the Jell-O mold, but it was tradition. Neighbors borrowed sugar, tools, sometimes even kept a spare house key. That's just how much trust there was. Saturday nights meant the whole family squeezed together around the radio and later the TV. And you never argued with Dad about what channels stayed on. Dads fixed everything in the garage. Bikes, radios, even the neighbor's toaster. A screwdriver and confidence could fix just about anything back then. And kids carried groceries home in paper bags that always split halfway down the street. Nothing like chasing runaway apples rolling into the gutter. School life was where classrooms were filled with wooden desks in neat rows, and a chalkboard that always seemed to be covered in dust. The teacher stood tall at the front, and every kid sat up straight when she looked your way. Every morning began with the Pledge of Allegiance. Little hands pressed over hearts, while the American flag swayed by the window. Report cards came home on paper, and you walked a little slower if those grades weren't so good. Recess was the highlight of the day. Kids playing jump rope, tag, and climbing on the jungle gym, the whole yard echoing with laughter. Lunchtime meant lining up in the cafeteria, trays of meatloaf, peas, mashed potatoes, and milk cartons, served by a lunch lady who looked like she could bench press a sack of flour. Chalk dust was everywhere. If you got stuck with eraser duty, you'd be outside clapping them together, white clouds rising into the air like little storms. Backpacks weren't common yet. Kids carried books tied with a leather strap, or just hugged them tight as they walked home. Classrooms had a big globe and a pull-down world map, and the teacher would point with a wooden stick telling us about places most of us had never even dreamed of. Recess games could get competitive. Dodgeball in the schoolyard. And if you got hit, well, you felt it. And nothing struck fear into a kid's heart, quite like waiting outside the principal's office, clutching your books, wondering how much trouble you were in. Playtime outside was where childhood really came alive in the 1950s. Stickball games filled the neighborhood streets until the streetlights flickered on. Everyone knew it was time to head home, but only after one last swing. Baseball gloves weren't shiny and new. They were passed down from older brothers. The leather was worn, oiled, and carried the smell of summers gone by. Roller skates clamped right onto your shoes with a metal key. Kids wobbled down sidewalks, laughing, arms flailing, sometimes with a few scraped knees to show for it. Bikes weren't just for riding. They had colorful streamers on the handlebars, and if you clipped playing cards to the spokes, you had yourself a motorcycle. Hopscotch grids were scratched out with chalk rocks. They disappeared with the first summer rain, but kids always came back to draw them again. Cardboard boxes and old sheets turned into castles and forts in backyards. The imagination did the rest. Tree houses were nothing fancy. A few boards nailed together, a ladder that barely held, but up there, you felt like a king. Sidewalks were alive with the click of marbles and the flick of yo-yos. Some kids won big, others walked home with empty pockets. On warm summer nights, fireflies lit up the air. We caught them in jars, holding them like tiny treasures that glowed against the dark. Red Rover and Kick the Can weren't just games, they were events. Whole groups of kids, black, white, Latino, joined in, shouting, laughing, daring each other to run faster, push harder, play longer. Playtime outside wasn't about toys. It was about friendship, scraped knees, and memories that never faded. Toys and games in the 1950s weren't flashy, but they carried a magic that still makes people smile today. The Slinky was a marvel of its own. You'd place it on the top step and watch in wonder as it clinked its way down step after step like it had a life of its own. Mr. Potato Head was brand new. And here's the funny part. The very first kits didn't even come with a potato. Kids had to use a real one from the kitchen. Let's just say after a couple of days, things got a little smelly. Hula hoops took neighborhoods by storm. Children spun them in driveways, front yards, and playgrounds. And if you could keep yours spinning longer than anyone else, you were the star of the block. Evenings often meant Monopoly at the dining table. Games could stretch on for hours, with siblings accusing each other of cheating, and Dad always insisting on being the banker. Lincoln logs built forts, cabins, and towers across living room rugs. Half the fun was stacking them high, and the other half was watching them tumble down with laughter. Tinker Toys let kids feel like inventors, building strange contraptions out of sticks and spools. A tower 2 feet tall felt like a skyscraper when you were 8 years old. And of course, every neighborhood had its cowboys. With a toy cap gun on your hip and a cowboy hat on your head, you weren't just playing pretend. You were the sheriff, keeping order on your street. Dolls weren't about store-bought outfits. Girls often dressed them in handmade clothes cut from old fabric scraps, stitched with love and imagination. And for the boys, little green army men staged epic battles across living room carpets. Entire wars were won and lost before Mom called everyone in for dinner. Then there was the Jack-in-the-Box. You'd crank that little handle, the cheerful tune would play, and just when you leaned in close, pop! Out came the clown, and no matter how many times you played it, it always made you jump. Food and treats in the 1950s carried a special kind of magic. At the corner candy shop, glass jars lined the shelves, gumdrops, Tootsie Rolls, Mary Janes. A child would reach up on tiptoes, coin in hand, and walk out feeling like a king for just a penny. Coca-Cola came in glass bottles, pulled ice-cold from a red metal cooler. The hiss of the cap, the first fizzy sip. Nothing else tasted quite like it. When the ice cream truck jingled down the street, kids came running, barefoot, with coins clutched in their fists. The driver leaned out, and for a nickel, summer felt perfect. Teenagers gathered at the soda fountain, chrome stools and jukebox glowing. Sharing a banana split was more than dessert. It was a first date, a little taste of freedom. School lunches were simple: a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, packed neatly in a metal lunchbox with a small carton of milk. It didn't take much to fill a kid's stomach. Or their day. Every kitchen had Wonder Bread on the counter, its red, yellow, and blue polka dots bright against chrome toasters and butter dishes. Soft as air, but somehow it made the perfect sandwich. Backyards filled with the smell of charcoal grills. Hot dogs sizzled as dads flipped them. Moms brought out paper plates, and kids ran around barefoot in the grass. The whole family came together, and laughter filled the air. At the diner, chrome milkshake mixers spun thick vanilla shakes, poured into tall glasses crowned with whipped cream, and a cherry on top. Sharing one with a friend meant 2 straws and a lot of smiles. Some meals were simpler still: Campbell's tomato soup and a golden grilled cheese sandwich on the kitchen table. Comfort food at its finest, warming both the belly and the heart. And then, the Jell-O salad. Pastel lime with fruit floating inside, proudly sitting on every party table. Nobody really loved it, but everyone took a scoop. Because in the 50s, that's just what you did. Entertainment in the 1950s was something special. Families gathered in the living room, eyes fixed on a small black and white television with rabbit ear antennas. Kids sat cross-legged on the carpet, wide-eyed as Howdy Doody came to life on the screen. If you were lucky, your family had a radio, too, glowing softly in the corner. Voices filling the room with news, baseball games, and those unforgettable serial dramas. And then there were the drive-in theaters. Rows of shiny Chevys and Fords parked under the stars, speakers hanging from car windows, the big screen glowing in the distance. Families shared blankets and popcorn. Teenagers, well, they were usually more interested in holding hands than watching the movie. Music was everywhere. Elvis Presley was shaking up the world with his hip-shaking moves and that unmistakable voice. Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard turned up the volume on Teenage Rebellion, one vinyl at a time. If you wanted to feel cool, you went to the diner. The jukebox glowed in neon colors. The chrome counter reflected milkshakes and French fries, and teenagers crowded around, dropping in a dime to play the latest hit. And if you really wanted to dance, you headed to the sock hop. Girls in poodle skirts twirled. Boys in rolled-up jeans snapped their fingers, and the record player kept spinning all night. Entertainment in the 50s wasn't about endless choices like today. It was about shared moments. Families around the TV. Kids glued to the radio. Teenagers dancing to rock and roll. Simple, joyful, and unforgettable. Fashion in the 1950s was its own world. Boys slicked their hair back with Brill cream until it shone like glass. You could smell that stuff a mile away. Girls wore saddle shoes and poodle skirts, stitched with little poodles dancing on the hem. And if you twirled, that skirt practically floated. Jeans weren't bought distressed like today. You cuffed them at the bottom, rolled them up yourself. And every high school boy knew if you had a Letterman jacket, well, you'd made it. Dresses had wide skirts with crinolines underneath for bounce. Walking up the street looked like a parade float coming down. And hand-me-downs? Oh, they were the norm. Sometimes too big, sometimes patched up, and you wore them whether you liked it or not. Girls curled their hair with rollers, slept in them too. No one looked comfortable, but it was worth it come Saturday night. Sunday mornings meant ties for the boys, even if you tugged at the collar and sighed. Moms stitched patches on worn-out trousers. And shoes? Shoes were polished every Saturday night like clockwork. Clothes weren't just style back then. They were pride. They told the story of who you were, what family you came from, and how your mom could stretch a dollar. Teen life in the 1950s had its own rhythm. At the diner, neon lights glowed while teenagers sipped sodas at the counter. Chrome stools, jukebox humming. It felt like the whole world fit inside those booths. Drive-in theaters were the place to be. Couples parked in shiny cars, popcorn in hand, and the big screen glowing under the stars. Half the time, nobody even watched the movie. Main Street came alive on Friday nights. Cars cruised slow, windows rolled down, radios blasting, neon signs lighting up the sidewalks. Sock hops filled school gyms with music. Circle skirts twirled, saddle shoes tapped, and live bands kept the kids moving until the chaperones called it a night. Bowling alleys were packed with families and teens. The clatter of pins, the shine of the lanes, and the laughter of friends trying to beat each other's score. Pinball machines glowed in lunch counters and arcades. A few nickels could keep you busy for hours, and if you won, the lights and bells made you feel like a champion. Part-time jobs gave teens their first taste of independence. Pumping gas, bagging groceries, or waiting tables. Earning your own dollar meant real pride. Dating had its rituals. Class rings exchanged, Letterman jackets borrowed. Holding hands felt like a promise. Winter meant ice skating on frozen ponds. Wool coats, red cheeks, snowflakes falling while kids held hands and laughed as they slipped. And summer? That was quarry ponds, cannonballs off the rocks, water fights, and sunburns you didn't care about. Carefree days that felt like they'd last forever. The holidays in the 1950s. They were pure magic. Christmas wasn't about gadgets or online orders. It was tinsel carefully hung on the tree, colored bulbs blinking slow and steady, and stockings stretched over the fireplace. Kids woke up before dawn, shaking their parents awake, racing to find the one toy they'd circled in the Sears catalog. Thanksgiving meant the whole family crowded around the dining table. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and kids sneaking olives or biscuits before grace was even finished. The 4th of July lit up the skies, sparklers in children's hands, fireworks booming above the neighborhood, and dads trying to light firecrackers without burning their fingers. Easter was polished shoes and pastel dresses. Families walking to church. Baskets filled with jelly beans and marshmallow chicks. The smell of spring drifting through the air. And birthdays? They weren't about bouncy castles or expensive gifts. It was a homemade cake, candles blown out in one big breath, and a backyard full of kids playing until the sun disappeared. Halloween had its own kind of charm. Kids didn't buy fancy costumes from a store. They made them from scratch. A cardboard robot, a cowboy with Dad's old hat, or a ghost cut from a white bedsheet. With paper bags for candy and leaves crunching underfoot, it was spooky, simple fun. The kind that sticks with you forever. And then came New Year's Eve. Families gathered in living rooms, black and white TVs tuned in to Guy Lombardo or the Times Square ball drop. Kids fought to stay awake in their pajamas, while parents clinked glasses and promised that next year would be even better. The holidays of the 1950s weren't about spending money. They were about family, tradition, and those little moments that turned into lifelong memories. And then there were some of the most unforgettable things that happened in the 1950s. Things that shaped childhood memories forever. And if you grew up in that time, you'll never forget them. Elvis Presley hit the stage, and suddenly the world tilted. Parents whispered that his moves were scandalous. But teenagers? They screamed, they danced, and they couldn't get enough. The music was loud, the hips were swinging, and for the first time it felt like the world belonged to the young. In 1955, Disneyland opened its gates. Kids today play Dreamlight Valley on a screen, but back then, kids saw the real thing rising from the dirt. A castle in the middle of California, Mickey ears on their heads, balloons floating in the air. It was pure magic, and families swore they'd never forget that first walk down Main Street. That same year, children lined up in schools for the polio vaccine. Sleeves rolled up, little fists clenched, nervous glances traded. But they stood brave, one by one, and when the shot was done, parents finally breathed a sigh of relief they'd been holding for years. By 1957, even the sky was changing. Sputnik beeped across the heavens, a tiny sound that echoed through every living room in America. Families huddled around black and white TVs, fathers serious, mothers worried, and kids staring wide-eyed at the idea of space. Suddenly, the future felt both exciting and a little frightening. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star, she was the movie star. Her laugh, her smile, her very presence lit up the screen. Even if you were too young to see her movies, you knew her face, her voice, her magic. And then came the hula hoop craze. Driveways and sidewalks filled with kids spinning, twirling, and collapsing in laughter when the hoop slipped. Neighbors cheered, friends competed, and for a moment, the whole world seemed caught up in a plastic ring. Finally, in 1959, Hawaii became America's 50th state. The news was filled with parades, hula dancers, and waving flags. For kids, it meant colorful postcards of palm trees, learning a new name for the map, and daydreams of a faraway paradise that felt almost too good to be real. The big events of the 1950s weren't just headlines. They were sounds, sights, and feelings that became part of growing up. They shaped the backdrop of childhood, while kids were busy just being kids. Everyday life in the 1950s wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was full of moments that stuck. Doctors still made house calls, showing up at your door with a black bag and a smile that seemed to make you feel better before he even opened it. Every dad had a heavy steel toolbox, scratched, greasy, and always smelling faintly of oil. If something broke, you didn't throw it out, you fixed it. On hot summer nights, the windows stayed open, and the hum of a fan was the only air conditioning you had. Kids fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside their window. Clothes weren't replaced every season, they were mended. Moms sewed patches onto worn-out knees, and hand-me-downs carried the stories of older brothers and sisters. Everyone knew the mailman, the barber, and the corner grocer by name. They weren't just people you saw, they were part of the rhythm of your days. Radios hummed in kitchens all day long. News, weather, and music floated in the background as moms cooked and kids did homework at the table. Church on Sunday wasn't optional. It was where families gathered, friends met, and the week seemed to reset with hymns and handshakes. Vacations didn't mean far-off resorts. They meant packing the car and visiting grandma, cousins, or relatives 2 towns over. Simple, but it felt like an adventure. Kids played outside until dark, stickball, hopscotch, tag. And when the streetlights flickered on, you knew it was time to head home. Life was simpler, slower, and filled with memories we still cherish today. And that was childhood in the 1950s. It wasn't perfect, but it was simple. Screen doors slamming, jukeboxes glowing, hopscotch fading on the sidewalk. And somehow, those little things became the memories we never let go of. So here's to the kids of the 50s and the world they left behind for us to remember.